Hey guys, I'm Trevor Daniluk. I'm from Comox, British Columbia, Canada, and I'm a professional hitchhiker. You heard that right, professional hitchhiker. I stream hitchhiking to show people what it's like, and this YouTube channel will show people that footage. I've been hitchhiking for 6 years, but only streaming for 2 years, so there's a lot that you haven't seen. I started hitchhiking because I hated riding the Greyhound bus around British Columbia to visit family. I ended up loving this mode of travel. It was interesting. It was free. It made the process of getting from A to B what I was looking forward to more than the actual destination. I went on my first hitchhiking trip for the sake of hitchhiking in 2014. This all started when I decided to take a semester off college and just go east to see what happened. The trip ended up being Kelowna, British Columbia to St. John's, Newfoundland and back, but it didn't start until November 1st, 2014. And I remember that because it's the day after Halloween, which is a horrible time to hitchhike across Canada. Like, winter is setting in. It was a bad time, especially having no experience. First day of that trip, I made it from Kelowna to Calgary, and everything went smoothly. I made it to Calgary after nightfall. I ended up getting dropped off at a Road King truck stop, and that's where I slept. It was snowing outside. It was miserable. This is November in Canada. Next day, I got a ride direct from Calgary to Saskatoon, and was invited over to the lady's house that picked me up, gave me a place to stay, dropped me off on the highway the next day. And that was the first time that a person who had picked me up invited me into their home and their life, more than just driving me to where they were going. Since then, since that first experience of someone inviting me into their home after picking me up hitchhiking, I've been invited into someone's home in almost every country I've hitchhiked through. And we're at 42 countries hitchhiked through now, so it happens quite frequently. From that point on, things went faster than I expected. I made it to a new province every day. Some people would take you just to the next town. Other people, like my ride from Kenora, Ontario to Montreal, Quebec, took me 2,000 kilometers. You never really know what's going to happen when someone pulls over. Most cars that pull over are just personal vehicles, cars, trucks, minivans, but you'll get all different kinds of vehicles pulling over for you. You'll get commercial trucks. The first time I had a truck pull over was in Quebec City, Quebec, to Truro, Nova Scotia, to motorcycles. I wouldn't get that experience until I was in Ireland, to scooters. The first time I had that was in Edmundston, New Brunswick. I've also hitchhiked in RVs, camper vans, and even airplanes by going to small municipal airports and asking really nicely. On this first trip, I made it all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the most easterly point in Canada, in a total of 9 days. It went fast. It's, was that 800, 900 kilometers a day. After spending a week in a hostel in St. John's, I turned around and hitchhiked all the way back to Kelowna, British Columbia, with a big sign that said "West, home for Christmas," while wearing a Santa hat. I got home from that trip mid-December, and after that experience of hitchhiking through Canada in the winter, quite unprepared for that experience, I thought that would be my last significant trip hitchhiking. But it turned out to be just the beginning. A few months later, my mom came to me and said she'd found a very cheap flight from St. John's, Newfoundland to Dublin, Ireland. $160 Canadian. Oh, that's pretty cheap. And that's what inspired what came to be my next trip, even though I didn't plan to do a next trip, and it was my largest trip. In the spring, I ended up going on that trip, and what that trip ended up being was going literally around the world. After hitchhiking across Canada to St. John's and taking my flight to Dublin, I hitchhiked in Ireland, in Wales, in England, in Scotland, in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Russia, Japan, to Tokyo, and I flew home. Not only was it my first time traveling internationally by myself, but I was hitchhiking. I was encountering cultural differences and some language barriers. This provides a challenge when you're trying to be responsible for yourself, but also reliant on others. It's a strange situation to be in. It was so different being in Europe, going to a new country every few days. The big exception to that was Russia, where there's 10,000 kilometers to get from the western border, from Latvia to Russia, to Vladivostok on the east coast. Once you got east of Moscow, there's not much between the cities. There's a whole lot of open spaces. But the people were friendly, the rides came quick, and the language barrier was severe. And once I made it to Vladivostok, I flew to southern Japan to Fukuoka and hitchhiked to Tokyo, which was, again, another departure from the usual for me. I found the people in Japan exceedingly friendly. Now both times I've been in Japan, people have invited me into their homes, shown me how they live their life. And that's one of the biggest things with hitchhiking for me is people pick me up, invite me into their car and into their life beyond what you'd get if you were driving your own car or taking a bus, a plane, or a train. And once I made it to Tokyo, that was the end of my first big international trip. Flew from Tokyo to Vancouver, and that was it. Once I was back in Canada, I found myself with no money and I needed to get a job, but I wanted to do something different. So I packed a duffel bag, backpack, and I hitchhiked from British Columbia to Calgary, Alberta, and found myself a job in an outdoor store and got a room to rent and worked there, saving up money. Working in the outdoor industry allowed me to get access to high quality gear and equipment, clothing, that I wouldn't have had access to. It's free or extremely cheap. So I accumulated some things. Calgary having rough winters, I accumulated a bunch of winter equipment, and I thought it'd be interesting to hitchhike to the Canadian Arctic in winter and potentially do some ice road hitchhiking. So the following winter, I hitchhiked from Calgary, Alberta to Inuvik, Northwest Territories, with the actual final goal of hitchhiking up to Tuktoyaktuk, which is, I believe, as far north as you can drive in mainland Canada without going to the Arctic islands of Northwest Territories and Nunavut. It took me, I think, 1 week to hitchhike from Calgary to Inuvik. Involves going through some very desolate areas, and it had my longest wait time hitchhiking ever out of Fort Nelson, British Columbia. I waited 8.5 hours, and it wasn't because the people there weren't nice. It was the winter, and the closest town after that was, I believe, Watson Lake, and that was like 5 hours away, and there just wasn't any traffic. So I was there for 8.5 hours, but twice I had people from the community come by with Tim Hortons coffee, and once was a muffin, the other time was a donut, because they saw me earlier in the day when they were going to work, and they also saw me on their way home from work, and there was some empathy, so coffee and donuts it was. A very Canadian experience. From there I made it to Yukon, Watson Lake, and then to Whitehorse, Yukon. Then from there I got a ride to Dawson City, and in Dawson City I did the sour cocktail, where you do a shot of whiskey with a mummified human toe in it, and you have to kiss the toe, get a certificate. It's very exciting. And then the next day I got dropped off at mile 0 of the Dempster Highway, which is desolate. There's nothing there. There's a gas station, but it's unmanned. It's all pay at the pump, and there's nowhere to go to escape the elements. And that morning it was minus 38 Celsius, and that was the coldest day of hitchhiking I ever had. I am at mile 0 of the Dempster Highway, as you can see over there. It's minus 37 this morning, so it's kind of cold, but I feel good. Next stop, Inuvik. And because it's so desolate, I had 7 cars drive past in the 4 hours it took me to get picked up in minus 37. But after 4 hours, I got a ride from a truck driver going all the way to Inuvik, carrying groceries for the North Mart. Yeah, got a ride to Inuvik. Woo! yeah, he took me all day. And when I asked him why he decided to pick me up, he said, because it looked like you were going to die if I didn't. So thanks to him. I won't name him because he probably wasn't supposed to pick me up. Most trucking companies have banned their drivers from picking up hitchhikers. So it's uncommon that they stop. But he thought my life was at risk, so nice guy. After driving all day, we made it to Nunavik. I got dropped off in a town I'd never been in the Arctic Circle in Canada at night, and I didn't know where to go. So I walked behind the North Mart to the back of the parking lot, set up my sleeping pad and my sleeping bag, and slept outside for the first time in the Arctic Circle. I believe that night was -32, so surprisingly warmer than the Yukon. But that comes back to the equipment I had. I had access to, in this case, free equipment from Mountain Hardware. They gave me a -40-degree sleeping bag, and well, they gave me a 4-season tent, but I decided to not use it because although cold, it was calm conditions, so I didn't feel like I was going to become part of a snowbank. And it ended up being like a decent night. But come the next day, I had a local man from Inuvik come up to me and said to me, "Were you sleeping behind the North Mart last night?" I'm like, yeah, that was me. He's like, "You know, there's a warming shelter in town open during the winter, so people don't have to sleep outside." And I'm like, this is good information. This is good information. So I didn't have to sleep outside after that. I didn't make it to Tuktoyaktuk because the ice road from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk was closed due to overflows, which is when the ice cracks, water comes up through the cracks, and it then freezes and creates like moguls, bumps on the ice, and it's a challenge for them to clear. And also because of blizzard conditions further up north, which just made the road impassable. I am standing on the Mackenzie River. This is the ice road to Tuktoyaktuk. It's about 180 kilometers that way. Here's Inuvik. Tuktoyaktuk. And the big shame about that was the last year for the ice road between Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, because they were building an all-weather road between Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, and after that winter season that would be open. So it was the last year where you got to drive, it's over 100 kilometers from Inuvik, and you drive down the Mackenzie River Delta and out onto, what do you call it, the Beaufort Sea, the Arctic Ocean. So you actually drive on the ocean, but frozen, out and around to Tuktoyaktuk. So I was kind of sad I missed that, but I still did some ice road hitchhiking. On the Dempster Highway, there's 2 ice road crossings in the winter, and they become 2 ferry crossings in the summer. But being the winter, I did the 2 ice road crossings, and that was in a fully loaded commercial truck, which was interesting. We were driving, and it was nighttime, and my seatbelt was on, because my seatbelt's always on. Risk mitigation. And he's like, "Hey Trevor, is your seatbelt on?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, you might want to take it off." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "We're about to cross a river, and if you need to get out of the truck, you'll need to get out quickly, so it's best to have your seatbelt off." Oh shit. Okay. So I did, and it's fine. This road is very well traveled. They keep track of how much weight they can have on and all the rules. It's very well regulated, but it is disconcerting to be driving on a frozen body of water in a fully loaded commercial truck, which weighs, I don't even know how much, because when that truck drives on the ice, it displaces enough ice and water that you can see the cracks that naturally form in the ice, like spreading and closing and stuff, like all over the body of ice, as well as some water that comes up through the cracks and kind of spills out over top. It's not what a road's supposed to look like, so mentally it's a challenge. But based on all the statistics of it, it's very safe. They know what they're doing. They have a specific thickness for a specific weight and speed and all of that. So it is safe. It just looks scary. I had my seatbelt off regardless. That wasn't my only experience hitchhiking on ice roads. I also tried to get any ride out of Inuvik on some ice roads, so I ended up hitchhiking a ride from Inuvik to Aklavik. A small bus pulled over with a young guy driving and a bunch of elderly people in the back. It turned out this guy was driving a bunch of community elders to Aklavik for a funeral, and he's like, hop on, hitchhiker, I'll take you where we're going. And we drove down, instead of across a river, we drove through river valleys, so like a river valley that snakes and weaves, which was interesting because you're not just going across, you're going kilometers around and following the natural bends of the river. And we're in a much lighter vehicle, so you're going 100 kilometers an hour down a frozen river, which is again abnormal. But the ice is surprisingly not slippery. They grade it like you would a ski run. There wasn't anything going on in Aklavik. There was a funeral, the whole community was there. So I walked around and hitchhiked back in a pickup truck, and same thing, 120 kilometers down a ice road, and got dropped back off to Inuvik. It was a good trip.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.